Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're listening from. My name is Eric, and this is the Five Head Podcast. Happening upon this podcast, and you want to learn a little bit more about me, check out the pre-podcast episode on YouTube at Middleview Media, Five Head Club Podcast, where I kind of give you some information about me, who I am, where Five Head came from, why I wanted to start a podcast, and what this podcast is going to be about. But this is my first real episode titled, Don't Believe Everything You Hear on AI. Because AI is kind of taken over the internet right now, and I think we need to step back and take everything with a grain of salt. So some of us are old enough to remember when the internet first came around. And I happen to be in that weird generation that went through most of my childhood without the internet. And then by the time we were graduating high school, we were on the internet every single day. We went from our parents opening the front door or coming out of the garage and yelling our name as loud as they could to see where we are, to being able to call us on our cell phones in my senior year of high school. And at first, the internet was almost just like any other gaming system. It was just, you were addicted to it. You got home from school and you wanted to get on the computer. And it took a while for society as a whole to realize that you can't believe everything that you see on the internet. Nowadays, that's not even a thing. Everyone already knows 90% of everything you see on the internet is just complete BS. But in the beginning, it was looked at as this powerful kind of tool for you to be able to reach anything in the world. I mean, I just remember countless discussions in school between family when I saw it on the internet. Nowadays, you get laughed at if you say I saw it on the internet. Well, no shit. Where else would you see anything? But in the beginning, it took a while for society to realize that even though at the time you couldn't add anything to the internet like you can now, there was no social media. It was really kind of crazy because no one knew exactly where the information on the internet came from, because it wasn't like you can contribute to it like you could now, if that makes any sense. You could get on a computer, get onto the internet and pull up information. There was just not a lot of option. No one knew where it even came from, especially teenagers. We just think, that's some adult somewhere is putting stuff on the internet. But because of that, you thought, obviously it must be true, because there's no way like my friend down the street is the one putting out this information, right? Like it is now. Anyway, I feel like we're kind of in that same kind of zone with AI right now. AI has just kind of exploded and has taken over the internet over the last decade or so. And when we think AI, we always thought like AI, artificial intelligence, right? It would be like, when that gets big, it'll be robots running around and all that stuff. But it seems like AI is taking over the internet. Everything you see, everything you read, every video you watch, almost everything you hear right now, is or can be AI produced. Doesn't mean it's not accurate. It just means the majority of it now is being produced with AI. And of course, robots taking over will follow. We all saw Terminator, right? Anyway, but what I mean about AI, not believing everything you hear on AI, I mean from a research standpoint. Let me kind of paint this where this don't believe everything you hear on AI came from for me. I'm on social media every day, scrolling, commenting, debating, posting, etc. Anytime there's a topic at hand that people want to debate or argue, or someone sees a comment and they disagree with it, now you'll get people calling AI, "Hey Grok, is this true? Ask Perplexity, is this true?" Whatever the AI is that they go to, they'll kind of use it for fact checking. So I realized something though a couple months ago when I had an argument with AI, and I was kind of laughing at myself at the time that, am I really just having this like 20-minute debate with AI? Like, I'm not even talking to a human being anymore. I'm just questioning what AI is telling me for like 20 minutes. It was kind of funny. But let me kind of paint for you what happened here. So this is back when AOC and Bernie Sanders were kind of traveling around the country and doing rallies. And he made a comment, and I didn't even know he made this comment, but he's made comments like this before. We've all had this debate. And of course, when a prominent politician makes a comment, it goes viral because people online start repeating the comment. And it wasn't a Bernie Sanders post that I saw. It was someone else who quoted what Bernie Sanders said, one of his recent rallies with AOC. The exact post, well, I'll find it and I'll put it up on YouTube if you're listening to this on YouTube. It was something like, since 1978, CEO pay has gone up 1,209%, while the typical worker pay has only gone up 15%. And I've had this kind of debate back and forth with people, this whole comparing apples and oranges to try to drum up emotions and hatred between people simply because there is a disparity between how much a CEO makes compared to what the minimum wage is and what the starting salary or even average salary of people are across the country. And it's a tired argument to me because it of course there's disparity. Of course the CEO is going to make way more than minimum wage. And you're kind of arguing two different things with this argument. So a lot of the examples are, look at Jeff Bezos. His wealth has gone up over the last 10 years while minimum wage has stayed the same. But that's two different things because minimum wage is a starting point in the workforce, teenagers, etc. And you're comparing that to one individual person's journey through years and years and years of being in the workforce and where they are today. And there's always going to be a disparity because no matter what minimum wage is, when people enter the workforce, always going to be starting off at the bottom. So of course their pay is going to be a lot different than a CEO's pay who's been in the workforce for the last 30 years. But this was specifically bringing up percentages, 1,209% the average CEO pay. So it wasn't about Bezos and the Elon Musk of the world who are worth hundreds of billions. It was just average CEO pay. I believe it said something like average CEO pay in 1978 was like $25,000 a year or something like that. Maybe it was 75. It was something. It wasn't this CEOs were making billions type thing. It was just what the average CEO pay, right? You start a small business, you have a local shop, you're not a billionaire from that. However, your average pay is still going to be a lot higher than the people that you hire, of course. It's trying to show that in 1978, CEO pay was more, but at least it was a lot closer to what the average worker paid. And now CEO pay is just ridiculous. And since then, CEO pay has gone up 1,209%. And what got me to comment on this was saying that the typical worker's salary has only gone up 15% since 1978. And that didn't make any sense to me because in 1978, the average salary was about $12,000 a year. So if you're making the claim that the typical worker's pay has only increased by 15%, you're claiming that now in 2025, the typical worker only makes about $14,000 a year. And that's simply not true, not even on its face. If you make $10 an hour at 40 hours a week for 52 weeks, that's over $20,000 a year. In fact, minimum wage is $7.50 right now. Federal minimum wage, if you did that 40 hours a week for 52 weeks, you'd be over $14,000 a year. And only 1% of the country actually makes minimum wage. 99% of the country earns more than minimum wage. So I decided to question this person and where are these numbers coming from? So they asked Grok. Grok, is it true that CEO pay's gone up 1,209%, like Bernie says, and the typical worker pay has only gone up by 15%? And Grok is an AI that is built into X, and Grok came back and confirmed that. I was like, this can't be. This is not. It's just not true. It's not that CEO pay going up 1,209% is not true. Everyone's pay over a 30-year period goes up 1,209%, or I would think on average, most people's pay does. Back in 1996, 97, when I got my first job, I was making $5.50 an hour. And I calculated that today, for my pay to go up the same rate as the CEO's pay has gone up 1,209%, I would need to make over $60 an hour right now. And I do make over $60 an hour right now. In fact, CEO pay has gone up 1,209% since 1978. Mine's gone up more than that since only 1995. And I am not a billionaire or a millionaire by any means. I'm living month to month just like the majority of the people in this country. and my pay's gone up over 1,209%. So I decided to question Grok. The craziest part is I first commented on the original post that this can't be true. The typical worker makes more than $14,000 a year right now, and most people's pay have gone up by 1,209%. And then this guy jumped in on my comment and said that's not true. It's been verified that, and we got in this back and forth, and that's when he asked Grok to verify it, and Grok did. Grok came back with an answer that yes, CEO pay has gone up. Studies have shown CEO pay has gone up 1,209%, while a typical worker has only gone up by 15% since 1978. And I was like, no, that's simply not true. Again, 15% on the typical worker would mean that the average person only makes $14,000 a year. So I decided to go in with Grok and say, okay, look, we're doing this because I want to know where are you getting the studies have shown. So this is where it gets interesting, and this is where I started to realize that you can't believe everything you hear on AI. Remember, AI doesn't just know everything. Where does AI get its information? AI gets its information from the same places you and I get information. Like if you were writing a dissertation for a doctorate, you would have months where you're expected to research your topic and what you're debating or what you're trying to say with reputable sources and analyze it, put it all on paper, pitch it, and that's your dissertation. And it could take months to dive into deep research like that. The massive benefit with AI is not that it does anything different than you, it just does it faster than you. All it's doing is researching the information that's on the internet the same way you would, but instead of taking days, weeks, and months to find reputable sources and dive into the sources and methods and understand them, it can do that in a matter of seconds. So that's the huge benefit to AI. So I'm not saying that AI is not a huge benefit. I'm saying that just like anyone else that you're debating with, that's researching with, AI is only going to spit out what's available on the internet. And if there's nothing but disinformation on the internet, that's what you're going to get from AI. So when Grok regurgitated this and said it's true, studies have shown, my first question is, what study specifically is saying that the earnings of the typical worker has only gone up by 15% since 1978? And it turns out when you ask AI to dive deeper, that it will. And it turns out it pulled that information from Economic Policy Institute. Now, Economic Policy Institute is generally considered a reputable source. They do a lot of data collection and analysis, which is great. Raw data is great. However, they are not immune from using raw data to spin a narrative, to project a narrative. I mean, that's what putting out information is, right? You're gathering information to prove some sort of point, and then when you put it out in a way that kind of proves whatever point you're trying to prove. But I wanted to see this EPI study because I want to understand the sources and methods and how in the world they would come up with the idea that since 1978, the typical worker pay has only gone up 15% when the average salary in 1978 was $12,000 a year. That just made absolutely no sense to me. And so I asked Grok for the link to that study. And when I got to the page, the first thing before I even looked at that, the first thing I noticed when I got to that link was it was actually a link to a few related articles from EPI. It was on the EPI site, but it was like a link to that article and a little blurb, and then like related articles under it. And the first related article that jumped out to me was an article from 2023 where the EPI said that thanks to Joe Biden's great economy, the average household income is now the highest it's ever been in the history of the United States. And so that was actually the first article that I clicked on from the EPI because I wanted to see where they were going with the highest average household income when the article that I was about to click on was saying that the typical worker pay has only gone up 15% from $12,000 since 1978. Those two things in itself, just the headlines, were contradictions. So I clicked on this article and I just read through a little bit of this article about average household income being the highest it's ever been in U.S. history. And they wrote the article. So like I said, EPI does a lot of raw data collection and analysis, which is great. But the article that they were writing was trying to praise Joe Biden and his economy. and I'm not bringing this up because I have anything against Joe Biden, and this has nothing to do with politics other than the fact that people will use raw data in order to argue politics. And you can take raw data and kind of spin it any way you want, depending on how you look at it, depending on what you're trying to show. So in 2023, while Biden was president, and at the time he was still going to be running for president, they were trying to show that the economy is so great. Look at the data. And this other article that came out, I think it was 2024 that came out, they were trying to show that there's such disparity between CEOs and the average worker, and they're trying to drum up emotion and hatred for CEOs to feed the people who are the Bernie bros, that just want democratic socialism and to take away the inequities and the disparities. But they're kind of contradicting things. So anyway, what this EPI article said about the average household income being the highest it's ever been, and I can't remember if it was $82,000 or $86,000 a year, but that's what they were saying the average household income was in 2023, I believe, is when this article came out. Average household income is $82,000 a year, I believe it was. That is a lot more than $12,000 a year. That is a lot more than $12,000 a year plus 15%. So I went back to Grok and I was like, wait a minute. EPI also put out this article saying that the average household income is $82,000 a year, which is a lot more than 12,000 plus 15% since 1978. When you think household income, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you think household income, you're thinking of mom and dad salary, right? Or dad and dad, or mom and mom, or the adults that live in the house that are paying the mortgage, that are paying for the food, that are paying the car payments, utilities, internet, gas, cable. That's what you think is household income. So when Grok said yes, but that's combined household income, the other study by the EPI is the typical single worker. I was like, okay, so if you split that in half, that's still $42,000 a year, which is almost 3 times what this other article is saying, that the typical worker's pay has only gone up 15% from $12,000 a year. And this is where I noticed the AI started to change its tune and change its answer. Now, at this point, I'm having this argument with AI. The person who originally called the Grok to say it was true, typical worker's only gone up by 15% since 1978, while the CEO pay has gone up by 1,209%. Once Grok confirmed it, he was gone from the conversation. In his mind, he asked AI, AI confirmed it. That means it's true, it's gone. But here, I'm at a point now where I've got Grok slowly starting to change its answer. I asked Grok, how is the EPI figuring this? I wanted sources and methods instead of me having to read through the EPI sources and methods myself. And I wanted to know how they're calculating this only 15% jump for the typical worker since 1978. And what Grok was able to find from the EPI article itself, so this is not just Grok making this up, this is the exact article that data came from. Grok analyzed the sources and methods and how they calculated this information. And what it turns out is they are skewing the numbers by including part-time work and child labor, essentially. So let me explain this real quick. So my son, 16 years old, gets his first job this summer, and he's making $10 an hour at a pizza place, right? So for the study of typical workers' pay has only gone up 15% from $12,000 since 1978, they're counting my 16-year-old son, who's working a part-time job, as the typical worker. So if my son works for $10 an hour for 10 hours a week, that's $5,200 a year. They're counting that as typical worker pay, which brings the average of the typical worker pay way down when you're including part-time teenagers who are working summer jobs. And if my teenager worked 40 hours a week, but only during the summer, and then stopped working when school hit, and only made $4,000 that summer, they count that as typical worker pay for the entire year, because technically for the entire calendar year, that's all he earned. So they're averaging that into the typical worker pay to keep the totals way down. But when I think typical worker, the same way with household income, I think a typical worker, the average worker, is someone who is living off of that income. That's what you count as the average worker. Someone who is working to live, to pay their bills, to put food on their table is the average worker. But they were also in the study where in 2023, where they were trying to show Joe Biden's economy is so great that the average household income now is over $82,000 a year, they were also including what would be my son's part-time job in order to up those numbers to say, look how great Biden's economy is. Household income is very, very high. So another good thing about AI is you can cross-reference stuff. You can ask it, okay, so when you take out the part-time workers that wouldn't really count for household income, because you're trying to tell me that you count my household income as my salary, my wife's salary. You're saying our household makes even more with every penny that one of my kids earn. My kids aren't paying the bills. That money is their money. That's not household income. That's their own spending money. So they're adding in any kind of part-time work for your children and anyone who lives in your house. If your mom happens to live with you and she earns a salary, but she's not helping you pay any of the bills, she's just trying to save money right before retirement or whatever, they're counting that as household income. Your household income went up when technically it didn't. That's not the way it works. They're also counting different ways for both studies. So if you work a second job, a side gig, they're counting that as household income, as part of your household income, fair. But in the other study, that typical worker pay has only gone up a certain amount, they're counting you as a second person with low pay. So let's say you make $60,000 a year in your normal salary, and you make about $10,000 a year in side gig income. They're counting that as two different typical workers, one making $60,000 and one only making $10,000 a year, in order to artificially lower the reporting on how much the typical worker makes. You're bringing it down. Your part-time job is bringing down the typical worker pay. So you're understanding what I'm saying, right? So they're using part-time and side gigs as a way of bringing down the typical worker average pay, so they could say the average pay has only gone up by 15%, but they're also including all that in household income when they want to say, look at how great the economy is under this president because household income is way up. So when you start asking AI, you start diving deeper and asking more pointed questions, it'll change. Because then I got into this discussion with Grok. If you remove the part-time work and you remove the side gigs and you remove the teenagers making their own spending money, the average individual income is up over $40,000 a year. Not 15% up from 12,000, which is only 14, which would mean that the percentage of salary increase for the typical person has gone up a few 100% since 1978. So again, it's all raw data, it's all raw numbers. It's how you spin it to prove your point or try to make your point. But the whole point I'm trying to make here is not this argument on CEO pay versus average worker pay. Of course, Jeff Bezos is going to make way more money than my 16-year-old son who's just got a part-time job at a pizza parlor. Of course, there is a disparity there. That doesn't necessarily mean any kind of wrongdoing just because there's a disparity. Sometimes a disparity just is. But anyway, my point in bringing it up is the person I was having this debate with, once they asked AI and AI regurgitated the first answer, they were done and they believed it. AI said it, so it's true. Next. And it's not. And that's my point. You can't believe everything that AI says because AI is just pulling information from the same articles and stuff. When you do a Google search and you were to ask, is it true that CEO pay has gone up 1,209% since 1978? You're going to get that EPI article. And AI is programmed to source things from quote, quote, reputable sources, which is all subjective. I mean, for the most part, don't get me wrong. Again, I'm not bashing the EPI. The EPI is generally looked at as a reputable source. They do a lot of raw data collection and analysis, good raw data collection and analysis. They do, 100%. But you can still take that data and spin it however you want. And when AI is out there looking for articles that it's programmed to believe to be reputable sources, it's going to pull the same propaganda, the same spin, or even sometimes the same misinformation as you would get yourself if you did a Google search. And that's why you have to take everything that AI spits out with a grain of salt. You also have to kind of look at how the question's being asked. Because once I started asking AI almost the same question, it changed. It finally got to a point with this Grok conversation where it was saying, yeah, they skew the numbers by adding part-time workers to the typical pay to keep that low, while also adding it to the household income to drive that up for that particular article and what they were trying to say in that particular article. Like, it literally admitted that. Happened again. I was in a debate with someone. I don't even remember what it was about, but someone called on Ask Perplexity, which is another AI tool that you can just Ask Perplexity and it will analyze what is being talked about and supposedly fact check it. And with that one, someone I can't remember. I'll try to find it and put it up too. Someone said something and then asked Perplexity, and Ask Perplexity gave an answer, and they said C, and that was it. They were gone from the conversation. I was like, no, wait a minute, but that answer doesn't make sense. I actually got Ask Perplexity to respond after having another conversation with this AI. I actually got Ask Perplexity in like 3 or 4 threads down to be like, you are correct. I was actually incorrect in my original answer. And I was trying to find that person and show them, look, you were taking what Ask Perplexity says as haha, see, that's what they said, so that's what the fact is. And now Ask Perplexity is saying it was incorrect. And I wasn't trying to find this person and repost what Ask Perplexity said about it being incorrect to prove, haha, I'm right. I don't care about that I'm right. My point was to show them like, look, AI was literally saying, whoops, I was wrong in that first answer. But most people don't do that. Now with AI, people are just like, if AI says it must be true. So my point is, you got to take everything with a grain of salt, and you've got to start asking pointed questions. And what a lot of people are doing now is you have access to AI, not live on a thread. So you can go somewhere else, ask AI the question, and you can practice asking it till you get the answer you want. Then you can go back to that thread and be like, all right, let's just settle this. Hey, Grok, or hey, ChatGPT, or hey, Ask Perplexity, isn't it true that blah, 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 blah? And it will say, yes, it's true because blah, blah, because you formulated that question because you've already gone and did all the AI polls, and you finally asked it in a way that it's going to spit out the answer that you want it to give. And that's why people need to start taking it with a grain of salt, because it's becoming a daily and almost every single post thing now. People are calling on AI for the fact checking. We used to call it fact checking. And now it's just you ask AI and it'll fact check it for you. And you should be re-asking it questions. You should be asking it to go deeper. You should be questioning not just the result, but say, wait a minute. You say in your response XYZ. Well, when I look at X, how come it blah, 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 blah? You needed to be very pointed in what you're saying, and you will start to see that AI will change that answer. And people need to start doing this and stop seeing a single answer from AI, believing it as fact, and then moving on. And I believe we can prove this. I believe we can prove that AI can pull disinformation from the internet just as much as you or I can. I have an idea to prove it. I don't know how we do this idea, but you know how everyone likes to say 95% of the scientists agree with XYZ, whatever it is, which is great. So generally, when 95% of the scientists agree with something, we all kind of agree that must be a fact. Although I will say, I generally agree with that, but sometimes I'm like, well, why would 5% of the scientists not agree then? What are they having to say about it? But that's a whole other topic. What I'm saying is, we can kind of prove AI can spit out disinformation just as much as you or I can by having 95% of the scientists for the next 3 months, every journal they put out, every blog, article, video they put out, somewhere in there mentioning the red sky, how the sky is red. It's as true as the sky is red, something like that, where they're basically claiming, collectively, the claim is now, when you look up at the sky, the color you see is red. Which is not true. When you look up at the sky, the color you see is blue. I understand the sky itself doesn't have a color. It's about light reflection in the atmosphere. I get it. Fine. But when you look up at the sky, you see blue, right? A clear day, clear sunny day, no clouds, you see blue. But if every scientist in the world and everything they put out for the next 3 months started mentioning how the sky was red, 3 months from now, if you asked AI if the sky was red or blue, it would say it's red, because that's the information it's collecting from. It's pulling from. It's programmed on what reputable sources are. Maybe some of those sources are directly named in the programming, but it's probably keywords or methods, or there's some sort of programming in there that you could tell the difference between a reputable source and not. So as long as what's considered a reputable source says it, AI is going to spit that answer out. And I'm almost positive 3 months of 95% of the world's scientists referencing red with the sky, you could ask AI at that time, is the sky red or blue? And AI will say the sky is actually red, while you're looking up at it and seeing blue. And that's my point of this entire discussion, is just like the internet when it first came out. Can't believe everything that AI tells you. You just can't. You have to ask it more pointed questions. And right now, people will make fun of you for diving deeper with AI, for basically having a debate with AI, but it's the best way to get to the truth. It's the best way to get to understanding where information is coming from and how it's being spun. I think it actually helps the AI. I think AI is programmed that was more people research a specific topic or specific data set and dive deeper into it, and it answers it more, it's going to answer it more accurately the next time someone asks that same question. Now, obviously, one person, me, deep diving with Grok on this one thing doesn't mean that next time someone asks about that, it's going to answer it differently than it did originally here as well, because the power of multiple quote, credible sources information is going to overpower my direct pointed questions to try to see if that data is accurate. But if millions of people started asking the same questions I was asking Grok on that specific topic, the AI is going to train to understand that EPI study that it's pulling this data from is skewed. And what's funny is what's happened over the last week is kind of showing that as well. We had these floods in Texas. Some kids are still missing, and people are finding this as an opportunity to play politics. Look, I don't care what side of the house you're on. I get that when tragedies like this happen, it angers us and it hurts, right? It hurts to see something like that and you want to place blame. But for some reason, it's just very hard for people to accept the fact that sometimes a tragedy is just a tragedy, that sometimes there's nothing you can do, that Mother Nature is actually stronger than human beings, no matter how much you prepare, no matter what you do. But of course, if there's an opportunity to use a tragedy for a political opportunity, people never fail. And immediately you got, this is all thanks to Trump cutting funding to NOAA and the National Weather Service. And I don't like coming off as defending stuff like that, and I'm not defending stuff like that. It is a legit argument that cutting positions at NOAA and National Weather Service may not be a good idea. However, for this particular flash flood, it didn't matter that some guy who had 30 years of experience, who would have been in bed asleep at 1 a.m. because he works at 9 to 5, happened to not be working there anymore. The prediction models that were being used, the warning systems that were being used, are the same ones that were in place prior to these Doge cuts. They're called flash floods instead of floods for a reason. They come on very quick with little to no warning. 36 feet or 26 feet, whatever it was, water rise in 45 minutes. We don't have anything available, regardless of how many slots were cut or not. We don't have anything available technology-wise to have predicted that. What I'm saying is, and this relates to AI, because people were, first of all, standing on the backs of dead children to try to blame a politician for a natural disaster. And they were using AI again. But the way they were asking it, this is the fault of Doge cuts, right? Right? AI. But what AI was answering was, yes, it's true. There was 17% or 25% cuts or 600 positions cut at NOAA and the National Weather Service. But that's not the point. Yes, it's true. Those positions were cut. The question is, did those positions that were cut, would that have made any difference if they weren't cut for that flash flood that happened? And again, I had the same discussion with AI. And once you ask it more pointed questions, instead of just saying, isn't it true there were cuts made? AI says, yes, there were cuts made. That proves that the cuts led to the flash flood. No, it doesn't. There happen to have been cuts. No, that doesn't mean anything would have been different. So I had to start asking AI more pointed questions. And as it turns out, the staffing levels that night were actually higher than they are in any other night. Warnings went out, flash flood warnings went out 12 hours before. The camp where these girls were staying at that lost their lives didn't allow cell phones in the camp, so they never got any warnings anyway. And the counselors that do have cell phones, the signal is so bad there, they probably never got any warning anyway. Because the water rose 26 to 36 feet in 45 minutes. The flash flood warnings were in effect for hours before that, knowing that the storm was coming, there's a chance for flash floods. The prediction models and the warning systems that were in place and being used on a daily basis before the Doge cuts, were in place and being used that night, even after the Doge cuts. Usually the staffing, I think it came down to staffing at night for those things is like 2 people. They actually, because of this storm in the area, ramped up. So they were overstaffed that night. So there would have been absolutely no difference in the outcome of what happened if Doge didn't make cuts to NOAA and National Weather Service. Now, and again, I'm not saying that it's good Doge made cuts to those things. I'm not saying that there's not an argument against cuts being made to those types of things, but it's not Doge's fault that this flash flood happened last week. And when you dive into it and you ask AI, what's the normal standard? What do they normally do in these situations? And how do they usually staff this? And when a storm is moving in, how do they usually use the models? How do they usually staff? What do they usually do? When you start asking AI those questions, everything that they usually did before the 600 person cut, they did last weekend when this storm hit. There was no degradation to service from NOAA or the National Weather Service due to these Doge cuts in relation to this storm in Texas. Everything went as it would have. It's just a terrible tragedy that this storm produced so much rain so quickly that it caused this flash flood. That's why it's called a flash flood and not just a flood, because it comes on unexpectedly and strong. And they were in Flash Flood Alley. And it's absolutely terrible. My hearts go out to these families and these girls and just everyone there. I could not imagine sending my child to a camp and getting that kind of call and trying to make my way through floods to go try to see if my child is alive. It's absolutely awful. But it's another situation where, depending on how you ask AI, people were playing politics with people's lives and we're trying to use AI to prove that somehow this is all one politician's fault. And it's not. And it's just another thing. Depending on how you ask AI, it's going to give you a different answer. And what was even crazier about this flash flood one was Grok was like overloaded with people calling onto Grok with all of these questions. And Grok itself was doing a 180 in every other comment and 100% proved not only can you not believe everything AI tells you because it's going to pull from the same sources that you and I would pull from Google. It just does it faster. So if there's nothing but disinformation on the internet, that's the information it's going to spit out because it doesn't know everything. It's doing the research just like you and I would, but also that the AI will contradict itself. It's not a human being. It doesn't have cognitive dissonance. It doesn't have like, well, I thought this, but then once I learned this information, now I know this. So then every time anyone asks me anything about this, I'll spit out the right information. If you ask it in a specific way, it's going to give you the answer you want to hear, even if it's completely wrong. It doesn't know it's contradicting itself. It's only answering exactly what's being asked. So do not believe everything you hear on the internet. We learned that back in the early 2000s. AI has been taking over how we use the internet, and it's a powerful, powerful thing. It is absolutely great. I'm not saying AI is a bad thing. I'm just saying I think we as a society need to be a lot quicker in learning that you can't believe everything you hear on AI than we were in learning you can't believe everything you see on the internet. Thank you guys for listening to my first podcast. It will get better as I go. I'll fumble less. I'll be able to explain things better. But I appreciate all 8 of you across the world that ever listen to this. Thank you. Stay tuned. Make sure you're following the Five Head Podcast on Middleview Media on YouTube. Like and subscribe so you can get notifications when the next episode drops. Five Head out.